Hey everybody, this is Perch. Let's talk about how a price cut might play out or could play out and the kind of things you need to worry about, think about if you're a comic publisher. First off, let's start with one premise, and I don't know that everybody agrees with this. In fact, I know some people don't. I know Joe Quesada does not agree with this, at least from things he said in the past. Dan Didio didn't agree with this, but of course he's not a factor anymore. People will disagree with this statement. That's fine. But for the purpose of this conversation, I can't leave it in complete limbo land forever. So let's just, for the next 10 minutes or so, we're just going to agree that comic books are priced too high for growth in the US market. What I mean by that, just to define the terms well, is that the current price of comics might work for current collectors who, yeah, I'm sure they will grumble and not love the cost, but they're going to keep paying for it anyway because they're collectors and they don't want to let go of their runs. They're stuck to them. They're married to them. So whether they like the price or not, they're going to keep buying. Okay, and that is kind of a true factor. Collectors always hate it when you describe their behavior like that, but it's like prices are too high. It's like, yeah, but you're still buying them. You say, yeah, people will cut back, but the big risk here is that new people aren't coming in. And to me, when you talk about a price cut, yes, it would be great if current collectors, people who buy comics, myself, others, I'm sure the people listening to this channel right now, you would love to pay less for comics, for sure. But you are today more than likely paying something for comics. You are buying them today with your cash somewhere, somehow. You are currently investing money. It's a problem for you that they're too high. But honestly, the bigger problem are all the people who are not buying at all. And if you're listening to this channel, you don't buy any comics because you've been priced out. That's the bigger fear. That's the bigger concern. And I think we have more than enough data to suggest that is a problem, that comics are just priced too high. The other challenge with the comics being priced where they are is it makes it a little bit more difficult for the newsstand to be able to carry them. Now, the newsstand is very different. People don't just leave their kids hanging around in the grocery store unattended and other things, so you don't have exactly the same newsstand you had back in the 80s. But even if you did, and even for the places that are kind of resembling the newsstand, when the comic costs $4.99, it's priced at such a point that it's a bit more daunting for the newsstand to carry a volume of comics like, say, a new, anywhere from they wouldn't get everything, but anywhere from 30 to 60 to 100 comics a week at that price point is going to be prohibitive. So the newsstand won't do it. And you might say, okay, if the person just came in and ordered nothing but DC and Marvel, yeah, they're still at about 25 comics a week. And at $4.99, that's expensive. So that's also a barrier. So let's assume, though, so everything that I just said, let's assume that price is too high, right? We need to get prices down. So let's say, let's also give one more thing in here, one more data point. Again, even though I think Warner Media and in whatever their new world, AT&T or Discovery, Warner Media, or whatever, and Disney, both, they do view comics to some extent as marketing. They don't look at comics as a high profit item. And this seems to really confuse a lot of people online, people who do videos. There's a lot of people who seem really kind of, they can't quite wrap their head around this fact. And I get it, it's a difficult one. But the decision has been made by those big corporations that the IP generated, the path to movies, is strong enough, high enough, that they can afford to take a lower profit margin on the comics because it really doesn't matter. This hasn't been pushed to its extremes, we're about to, of saying, well, what if you made zero money off the comics? The way you do this business case, if you're sitting there, you're on the board, or you're part of their group, is you would say, all right, what if we actually lost money on comics? What if for every comic we printed and sold, we lost 5 cents, let's say? All right, that'd be tough, right? You'd basically be running a business at a loss. But what if, in order to do that, you got the comics in a dramatically higher amount of places, meaning, you had a comic rack in every Walmart, in every Target, spinner racks in grocery stores. The brand was in more places, and therefore, even though we were losing money on the comics, and by the way, there's a catch in what I did earlier. If you're an MBA student, you've already got it. But let's say we lost money on the comics, but the brand gain of what we would bring in for video games, licensing, merchandising, movies, etc., we got a 5% lift. Well, you'd make that decision all day long if you were AT&T and Disney, because that 5% lift would be worth far more than what you'd lose on the comics. So of course you do that. Now, the little math flaw I introduced earlier, in case you're accounting, is if you were losing money on your business, is different from saying losing money on every unit. Why that matters is if you're losing 5 cents on every comic today in the direct market, that's a loss, but it's not terrible. If you expanded to the newsstand and suddenly you had 10x the amount of comics going out the door, and you were still losing a flat 5 cents per comic, that would be bad. And that's where scale plus loss is a problem. But anyway, I'm getting too complicated. So one of the first things that would have to happen if we're talking about prices lower is that the parent companies have to admit and have to maybe even publicly state that the comics are a loss leader or the comics are intended for a bigger purpose. And if they were to do that, it would be, I think, honest. People would be saying, what they believe. But a side effect would be these corporations would quickly go to well, let's make sure that this loss leader is not consuming a ton of money. Let's make sure that we're operating it, as thin as possible. This is how Disney thinks. We know this is how they think with other parts of their business. We know AT&T is the same. So if suddenly you said, well, we're comfortable losing money, but we do want to optimize the amount of money we lose. So if the comics are just a vehicle to get people into movies or get T-shirts and toys and things sold, cool. But then why are we affording Jim Lee? Why would we afford anything but the cheapest possible animation? So that's one of those be careful what you wish for moments, because while it would be kind of nice on one hand if the parent company's admitted comics could serve as marketing and therefore let's not worry too much about the profit, that would naturally mean you would go for cheaper people on the comics, and that wouldn't be that would be bad. It would be bad for the industry. It'd be bad for people who enjoy comics. Unfortunately, if Marvel or DC, or certainly if both, if they reset their price down to say $2.49, right, $2.50 for a comic, let's say they went further. Let's say they reset it down to $2. It would create a very strong incentive, and that's too nice of a word, for all the indie comic publishers to follow suit. It would be very difficult for Image to hold a $3.99 price tag, or some of these companies $4.99 price tag, while the big guys have reset the price backward. And that's why you need to think about the chain reaction of how all these things work. Now, I started off by saying I do believe comics are too expensive, and I do believe a price cut is necessary, and I believe the price cut should come arguably on the backs of Marvel and DC. They're the largest companies. They're the ones that are making money with the movies and with licensing and everything else. They are able to make this transition. The challenge is, how do you do that while maintaining good funding for the team? How do you do this and still hire quality artists and quality writers and everything else? Well, that's where you have to get distribution higher. You have to get distribution out of just the direct market. If you this is what I've said in the past, and I stand by it. Lowering the price has to be a bunch of different things. It's not just lowering the price. It needs to be lowering the price plus getting it into the bigger market, so you have more brand power. So therefore, you can bring more argument that your product needs to look good and be quality and be consumed. I think that certainly people bring up newsprint. Sure, newsprint's fine. That's really not where all the savings come from these days. You can do it, and you can certainly keep your costs down, but the administrative costs of these companies and some of the other things are the bigger factor today. Just going paper alone won't give you a huge bang for your buck, a little bit. But we have to start, in order to do this properly, we have to get comics more places, and we have to actually start thinking of them differently. We have to start thinking about them as valuable for something else. The other option here, and this won't happen, is that Marvel AT&T and Disney shed DC and Marvel completely and let them go be standalone entities like IDW and like the rest without the corporate backing behind them. And basically, then they have to run at a profit, but the profit is publishing, and they can kind of do what they want. That's another way this can work. That would also potentially lead to price cuts, but it would be a very tricky and very bloody situation because there would be a lot of staff that would have to be laid off in that case. It would have to go back to kind of how the business was operating, 30 years ago, and that would be extremely difficult for them to do at this stage. Maybe healthy in some weird way, but it would not be trivial for them to do that. So price cuts. It's complicated. I know people hate it when I say that, but it's not as simple as just, hey, reduce the prices and eat the costs, and everything will work itself out. There's actually more factors here, and we haven't even gotten into what this would do to the retail chain. But that's a discussion for another day or another video. Anyway, what about you? What do you think? Price drops. How does that work? How do you, as a customer, handle? How would you suggest a price drop be rolled out and be taken care of, or is this even worth it? Every now and then I come across people who are like, the price is just fine. I'm happy. I pay it. Price is just fine. What are you even talking about? And those are always weird conversations because it's like, well, okay, but I think I think the market's telling us that it's out of whack. But to each their own. Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.